Hello and welcome to the Jailhouse Parlor podcast. This is going to be episode 12 with Hannah and Aaron, who are, well, the Aaron is not me. And Hannah and Aaron are two people that I used to work with back in Florida, and I decided to get them on, and we're going to be talking about basically the Christian faith in church and its current state and kind of where it's come along various topics such as abortion, gay marriage, and sort of where things have been going and how they see them as laymen. I'm putting out this intro as well just to let anyone know if they're watching the video version of this that there were some strange tech issues during the recording that desynced the video that's coming off of Discord for the webcam of Hannah and Aaron. So if you are watching it, you may notice that their faces, their mouths don't match their words as they're coming out, or mine may not at different points. But I did what I could in the editing bay to resolve that so that whoever is talking and having their time is matching their audio as best as possible so that it is at least a good viewing experience on that end. Otherwise, for those on the audio side, no worries. None of the audio got edited. Everything should be just as seamless across the video and audio sides. As always, keeping this just long form and wide open. But I just wanted to give that heads up. Otherwise, glad to be back doing this podcast and trying to find and think about interesting people that I want to come on and talk about things that I care about and I think are interesting or pertinent. So enjoy again. This is a Jailhouse Parlor podcast, episode 12 with Hannah and Aaron. Alrighty, and we are recording. Hello, welcome to the Jailhouse Parlor podcast. As always, I'm Aaron. Tonight and this could get confusing, but tonight we have on Aaron and Hannah, two people I used to work at least laterally to in the retail world back in Florida. And to sort of at least start out the premising, just to tee up what I'm looking to try to discuss here, is that at least I'm seeing a lot of where the West, where America, where the country culture is going, and I'm very curious about the church that I used to be a part of. I have a Christian background, which is non-denominational, but might as well have been Baptist for all I knew. And I've been kind of following Hannah in a light way across IG for years and seen, I guess, what felt like an evolution of the church, or at least some representative. And so I have you guys on today as just laymen, as just people that are regular citizens, regular people who also are still quite good practicing Christians from at least what I understand. So guys, welcome to the jailhouse. And
thank you.
I guess to kind of the starting I was thinking about for this is we all could perhaps provide our backgrounds, our upbringings, like small little bios for, I was born here, but what is sort of your relationship with the church over time, your relationship with Christ, your relationship with the religion, theology, and all that up until present day. Would one of you like to start out with that, or because I can run through mine as well?
Yeah, I can go first. Aaron has a short basis to go off of because his would not be short.
Yeah, we'll be 20 minutes in before I finish. So.
Okay, cool.
Well, I at least was born into the church. Basically, the church, actually, literally the church I'm still going to. I was born, my parents were going there before I was born. So have been going to the same, not the same building, but the same, kind of church body since I was born. In
denomination?
Non-denominational.
Okay.
Yeah. What would you say, Metro, like leaning towards any denomination, or?
Well, I mean, you were Sovereign Grace was its own sort of denomination that.
Yeah, that was just like a weird culty vibe, though.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not like Baptist or Pentecostal or like it kind of, but they were part of the Sovereign Grace Church, which is like a body of churches. But they
like a collective.
But they left that before we started dating.
Yeah.
So.
Does your
yeah, I guess. Like,
Yeah, well, I know. I think Hannah, your father is like is a musical teacher or something like that. So the
He is, yeah. He's a music teacher.
yeah. So the question I'm getting, just so it kicks out of my head, is that your parents have like no. Well, part of me thought like your dad was like a pastor or something like that for some reason, but
No.
is he just like
No.
Mr. Mendez at the church and
Mhm.
that's about it? Like helps with the
Yeah.
music program or
Yeah,
something.
both of my parents are teachers. I mean, they're involved. They've always been involved in some way, but never in like a leadership, like a, they would kind of lead like a small group. They used to lead small groups, but no, other than that, they're just normal churchgoers. Anyway, yeah. So I've been going to the same church my whole life. So kind of knew all of the, I don't know, the lingo, the lifestyle,
Christianese,
yeah. And I was baptized when I was like maybe 11. I think I was 11. So I was like definitely old enough to grasp the concept, because my church, because we don't believe in like infant baptism, we believe that you have to be old enough to understand what you're doing. Looking back though, I'm not sure that I was like fully, I knew what I was doing, but I don't think I fully grasped the concept of it. And then I don't think that I would say that I really became a Christian myself, in the sense that I really accepted the faith for myself until I was maybe in high school, like early to mid high school.
Yeah.
So there was never like, how some people when they're Christians have this very dramatic like conversion story or coming to the church story. Mine was never like that because I grew up there. So
you're just at cafeteria having pizza one day. You know what? Actually, I'll roll with this.
Yeah, pretty much.
I will follow Jesus.
Yeah. I think that sounds good. Yeah. So high school was weirdly not that long ago, because I graduated 7 years ago now.
13, 14, 2013?
14, yeah, 2014. So I would say since then it's just been an interesting process, and now I'm kind of at the place of trying to figure out what I actually believe, because I am kind of realizing that a lot of what I was taught I don't fully line up with. So I'm kind of in this weird place of like, how much of this is like actually in the Bible, and how much of what I was taught is just like someone's opinion on what the Bible says. Anyway.
Yeah.
So that's just a short kind of overview.
So I've actually found you in like a murky water area of.
Yeah. Yes, actually, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Okay, that's interesting.
Pretty murky.
A good for discussion area. Do you want to give us yours, Aaron, and break up our couple, and then I'll go after you?
Yeah, we can have a ha sequence here, in an acronym sense.
It would, either way, no matter which one of us goes next, it would be ha.
Right, instead of aha or something like that. So I would say I actually didn't start going to church until I was like quite young. I'd say like post kindergarten. So I was quite young, like generally speaking. My grandmother had a church that her and my aunt and uncle like went to, Lake Hill Bible Chapel out right by 1285 actually. Like, so if you hit that McDonald's there that we all know there on 436 and made that immediate left there at that light, it's a little church right there around the corner from 1285. So that was actually where I spent a lot of my.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's a good little small. Yeah, it's a good little small church. But I grew up there. I think my mom and I, because my mom had a limited religious background. I would kind of frame out both of my parents and their families as pretty just basic blue collar. My mom with a military brat background. She was born in Munich, Germany. I think legally I could go get dual citizenship, and
do it.
I'm thinking about it at some point. But yeah, so I grew up there. And I think that they had really good. I think that I would say they had pretty good education on the Bible. Like I was reading the Bible or getting verses down, and my mom just had us really a part of it for Vacation Bible School week in the summer. They had a kids club every Friday night, so we were basically at the church. We were at the church like 3 or 4 times a week in a way, because my mom was also the cleaner for the whole church for like the 2 buildings in the house in the back. So we were there for early service Sunday, where just, guys call out hymns and everyone like sings hymns, or they get their like 5 minutes to like ramble on about things that I don't remember. And then regular service, which was Sunday school into regular service. And then we'd be there like Thursday night to clean the church. And then Friday night for kids club, which was like, here's a bunch of fun, dinner, and then a lesson. So I had that, and I think I probably got baptized at a similar age to you, Hannah. Because I would have to frame that my parents got divorced around when I was 10, and mom more or less either kicked herself or got kicked out of the church because of the next relationship she had after my father. And there's a murky area in there that I don't need to dive into, basically. But mom was so pig-headed, talked to the even-headed elders, and basically they're like, we can't approve of how you're going about this process based on current legal statuses, granting whatever relationship statuses that all parties feel. So we kind of were out. So I was out of like a family that I had spent, like what felt like a decade on or something like that, like, a good amount of time. We then go try out like 1 or 2 more churches that either soccer friends' families were a part of, but just couldn't connect with them, couldn't feel integrated with them, or one of them was just asking for money too much from the pastor's end. So my Christian connection ended up just being very strained and was kind of anchored on me going up to Camp Horizon up in Leesburg during the summer, where I'd go in for like the 1 week of training to get ready for dealing with 14 kids of either elementary school to high school age. So I'd have like I think I did 1 7-week period and then like a 4-week period over or something like that. So that was basically like my fall from the church and kind of my feeling of someone else than God deciding who belongs here. And just, I don't know, there's and so that's just where that sort of fell away for me. So, and I got, saved with my mom when we were both young. I think I still have the Falling Apart Bible with the date on it. Got baptized like years after that. But I would say like, I'm fascinated in recent times on, especially since we're considering starting our own family in the next like 4 to 5 years. It's kind of like what's a great cornerstone, and what's a great cornerstone that I've sort of relied on, because with how everything's going and how sort of baseless a lot of things feel these days, I'm kind of running a debate in my head as like, does a return to like Christianity with a more mature integration with science and reality, like how does that play out better, and that's about where I'm at, and that's about where I played at. So haven't been back to my camp or to a church in any fashion for years now. But yeah, I miss quite a few pieces. So yeah, that's been my role.
Cool. Yeah, my story is probably a little different than both of yours. I grew up in Beverly, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, and I went to a Catholic church growing up. And long story short with that, around the time that Catholic priests started doing things with little boys they shouldn't be doing, my dad was like, we're going to stop going to this church. And so even though my church wasn't like mixed up in that, my dad was like, we're going to be done with this faith. And so we stopped going to church. But I grew up my whole life under the impression that I was a Christian because I believed in God, and because that's all I thought it took. And I thought I was going to heaven because I thought, well, I do more good than I do bad, so I should be all right.
Which, by the way, is basically what the Catholic Church teaches, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I was 7.
I'm gonna enjoy the
my
religious
favorite
shit
Catholic.
talk in this whole podcast, and I'm gonna enjoy it.
Yeah, my favorite Catholic church memory was our priest used to sing, like a cant, and then we would all respond, and it was Hosanna in the highest, and he would say that, but like Hosanna in the, and whenever he would do it, I would say lasagna in the highest.
This is like the
Much to
this
the
is like the best version of Simon Says right now with the lasagna based butchering.
Yeah, so I got ridiculed and reprimanded for that a number of times by my parents, but it was too good to pass up.
So dumb.
I mean, I was 7, so.
Nothing's
Anyways,
changed.
so yeah, so
Nothing's
now
changed.
fast forward. Yeah, no, I was
I am a little bit.
fast forward to high school, and so now I'm 15, and I've gone most of my life believing that I was a Christian, and I get invited to go to church in Vero Beach, Florida, and for youth group. And that night, the youth pastor, whether, I don't think it was planned, but he ended up giving a gospel presentation. And he basically said, hey, you need Jesus. And the good thing is, all you have to do is accept him. He's done all the work. But if you want a relationship with God, you just have to trust Jesus and believe in him. And I was like, oh, cool. Well, that's kind of what I've been looking for my whole life. And I thought I already had it and didn't know. And so that was February of 2003. So I've been a Christian since then. So that's good gracious, 18 plus years now. Then I remember going home that night and telling my mom, Mom, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and I want you to do it too. And she was like, well, I already have. And I was like, what do you mean? Because I've been living here for 15 years and I've never even heard about this guy. And so that led to some difficult conversations, and now my mom is an awesome woman of the Lord, and it kind of changed her life too, following that. But yeah, so since then I've been involved in church. I went to youth ministry through high school, and then I served in youth ministry every year after I graduated up until the year that our son was born. So for 14 or 15 years of my life, or even more than that, I guess 16 years of my life, I was involved in youth ministry either as a student or a leader. But as far as like where I am in the church now, Hannah and I are in similar places. I would say I'm a little less murky than she is on some things, and maybe more murky than she is on other things. And so we can kind of get into that as you ask questions. I'll kind of tell you the things I've been wrestling with lately as they come up.
I can't even begin to attempt to name it. So if you've got like a hot button that like you wanted to like either you want to bring up, like come forward with it. Like I'm here to moderate. I'm not here to run the whole ship top to bottom. I got you two on here for a reason.
Sure. Well, I mean, I can just tell you then in terms of where the church is today, one of the things that I struggle with a lot is just the way that the church interacts with the world and interacts with the culture around us. I think it's very possible to not celebrate something that the Bible may say is sin, but also not demonize the people who are living in what the Bible would say is sin. And I think historically the church has done pretty poorly at that in regards to homosexuality. And now, like, okay, when we were kids, like that was all it was. There was gay, and then like there was lesbian, and then there was straight, and then like maybe like as we got to teenagers, like people started talking about being bi, but like now there's LGBTQIA plus. I don't know what half of those things even stand for, but I know they're out there, and I know people identify that way, and I think in general the church does a pretty poor job of loving those people. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I've been doing lately, and I admittedly have not done enough of it, is I've been trying to go back to the original Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, like what the Bible was written in originally.
Yeah.
And trying to track down those words and what they mean in those original languages when the Bible speaks about homosexuality. Obviously, the other things weren't in existence in their vernacular. But I think for me, I don't have the confidence to say whoever translated this from the original text translated it accurately, and now I'm going to go tell this person who is, identifies as gay or is in that community that because that they feel they were born this way that they're going to go to hell based on what they like really don't have much of a choice in who they are. So yeah, I've been really digging into that lately a lot, but again, I don't speak Hebrew or Greek or Aramaic, and so I need to learn a lot before I can actually come up with a decision on what the Bible actually says about that stuff. So
yeah. Have you had any commentary or any additions or subtractions with Aaron as he's been going through this, or has this been mostly his own side quest?
No, I think this is something we're both wrestling with. I would say me as of more recently, I would say up until recently I was in the camp of like the Bible seems pretty clear that this is a sin, but very much in agreement with him that the church treats these people horribly and like not, that's a whole different almost a whole different conversation. Like I don't know. I think I've recently kind of started to question like, okay, how do we even know for sure that like I'm kind of in the same camp with him as like, how am I going to look at someone who's gay, for example, and say, oh, well, because this book that, which granted I believe is true, but how am I going to look at someone and say like, oh, this book that has been translated and translated and translated and no one can even agree which translation is correct? How am I going to take that as a basis and say, well, therefore, your whole life and your identity is invalid? Like, I don't, so I think both of us are kind of in a stage of like trying to figure out, I don't know, I feel like our answer right now would be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is there any leadership that you see in your church or outside of your church that we could vaguely categorize as like as just Christian leadership, Catholic leadership, or whatnot? Do you guys identify, or kind of follow anyone that has any decent arguments to like solve this issue that don't feel lazy, heresy, something like that? Like, because I definitely I wasn't aware this was as big of a struggle as it might have been for just you two. Like, we don't know each other, but yeah. Have you
definitely not within the church. I would say our church, at least our church is pretty staunchly, this is a sin. There's no room for this in the church. Like, if you're going to be a practicing church member, there's no room for.
I will say our church, I think some of our leadership has at least taken a turn towards the realization that, man, we need to care for this community better.
Oh yeah.
So for example,
but as far as being like affirming,
yeah,
I would say definitely not.
Yeah. Were you in Orlando when Pulse happened?
I had friends that almost went that night.
Yeah. So one of the pastors from our church was one of the first people there to administer aid and hand out waters, pray for people. We have a pastoral team who is, much more progressive. Half of our pastors for sure voted for Biden, which is, we had people leave our church because our church leadership would not publicly endorse Trump. Which is insanity. But yeah, so we're definitely have at least people trending in the right direction of we need to care for these people. But as far as I think the one time I brought it up to that same pastor who was one of those guys at Pulse, I said, hey, do you think there's any room in the New Testament for us to wrestle with the idea of homosexuality and the way the Bible speaks about it? And he quoted a line from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, where Jesus basically says, or maybe it's not in that, it's somewhere in Matthew, but Jesus basically saying, like, quoting Genesis where he says, for this reason, the husband shall leave his family and be with his wife, as Jesus affirming the traditional nuclear family of one husband and one wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, in my head, I'm thinking, do you really think that he wasn't just talking about the culture, and there really wasn't any cultural example of a monogamous homosexual relationship in the time that Jesus lived? The majority of the relationships that we saw that were homosexual in any way in biblical times were adulterous. It was a husband or a wife cheating on their spouse, typically with a young boy,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so obviously Jesus would not affirm that because it's, you know, troublesome on a number of different levels. But first and foremost, it's adultery. You're committed to one person, but you've left them. So I disagreed with him, but I'm like, so he had a reason that he thought was real, but I just didn't agree with it, and so.
Yeah, but I would say, in answer to your question, have we found anybody in the church sphere who has a decent argument? I would say probably yes. There are definitely people who consider themselves Christians, and even church leadership of different denominations who are LGBTQ affirming. And that would probably be one of their arguments. There are a few. There are some out there. I would say the main argument is that there was no precedent in the time period when the Bible was written that would even allow for what we see today of, you know, a monogamous homosexual relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the main argument that we found.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So providing it, I find it funny because I have there's a lecture on Genesis that I revisit often, and we'll dive in. We can dive into that discussion later. I want to try to get as much out of you guys before I will get long-winded, and I think Aaron and I are very similar on that one.
Yeah.
But I find it funny how the pastor is nobly, like, very willing to give aid to those in need, but there is still, it still feels like there's this failure of framing themselves properly to understand that associating with sinners is part of the fucking job.
Yeah.
Like and there's never been any equation of one sin's greater than another and stuff like that as far as my studies went. And so the only idea that I've sort of came up with myself in my studies and the framing that I've gotten from this Genesis lecture is sort of this framing. Is like, why has no one really thought about the healthiest form of human existence, so to speak? Because I think the only thing I think if we were all being honest and really shooting for the best version of the future with like a focus on kids, on community, on family, we would have the same sort of we would frame out our relationship with the homosexual, the Alphabet Company, which I'm saying sillily but respectfully there, is that I think we would all agree, like, living a Peter Pan life is not conducive to a long-term game plan for family, for kids, for anyone. So my framing that I would think, and I want to hear your guys' play on this, is that we can have this whole reference to that the Moses Rite, one of the first 4 books, where man shall not lay with another man, or if you want to have the affirmation of Jesus from the Matthew quote, that a man shall go off and nuclear family. I just don't. I almost sit there and go like, well, the healthiest version of a family, based on just psychological elements and scientific elements, is a father, a mother with the child or the children. That is, just generally speaking, like the best version. Like, if we have a general agreement on that, I'm not about to demonize or say anything, because I imagine we know people that had one parent, practically no parents, grandparents. They had 2 dads, 2 moms. Some, like, you can run a variant of that. But the majority of the human race And the best version for the healthiest children has traditionally been the nuclear family, and success can come in from the other ends. So what I would almost always want to think, or what I would want to posit towards a Christian leader or pastor, is like, well, wouldn't there, what would the most sober framing of a anti-homosexual narrative be like? Don't have these Peter Pan lifestyles that are just you never grow up and you never take on responsibility of life and take on the responsibility of being a part of raising everything else around you. Like, that would be, and this is my first time really articulating out loud, so please give me the grace on that one. But that's about that's the best mature framing I could have of it, is that the worst version of a nuclear family is abusive relationships with gaslighting and all that, and abandonment of children and stuff like that. The worst version of the homosexual lifestyle is men never growing up and taking the responsibility and choosing to take the responsibility that they need to become men, adults, and leaders in their community, and flagships for like being the warriors of tomorrow, and however you want to frame the warriors, whether it is sword and shield or with hugs, kisses, encouragement, and stern words when you're being an idiot. Like, just dive in if you guys have any feedback for that, please.
Well, I think it's interesting because maybe this is off base, but it just makes me wonder, like, why the church in general, especially evangelical church, has taken such a strong anti-homosexual standpoint, when I think the real issue is just kind of like, especially when you're referencing like the Peter Pan lifestyle, I would say the real issue is just like almost like a promiscuous, like, hookup culture, kind of like, let's not, and I want to be careful because, like, I'm not trying to get into the whole like slut shaming, world. But I wonder why the main canons, I guess you could say, are aimed at homosexual people, when I wonder if the real issue is not that, of just like the idea of, let's hook up with whoever we want to hook up with and not be monogamous, and
like, well, okay, so let me.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I'll happily jump into the slut shaming world, not to be someone that slut shames, because people have to deal with the responsibilities and the consequences of what they do, and I don't know what they need. Like, I don't know what each individual needs, and people work in different ways, and I always like to make sure if I'm doing any amount of judging, it's because I'm aiming at something higher, or at least positing that there is something higher that they could be. And if they don't want to go for that, that's on them. And if I'm going to be anything like the best version of myself that I want to be, then associating with these people fairly and with human respect is on deck, even if I don't agree with their decision making. Because I could be, framed out in a very strange way on account of, like, for my sexual history, I have had to have someone that was in a very committed relationship situation. My ability to, like, sleep around, like, I had solid attempts, no fucking chance. Like, it's just like a mental block. I think I'm a very codependent person. So my ability to identify with that promiscuous world is very limited, except for, like, in my imagination, where there are less consequences, you could say. I think the only thought the one thought I want to make sure I put out, and I'll let you jump in after this, Aaron. I think the easiest thing that ends up happening is that, like, the homosexual lifestyle of that world feels like the easiest enemy to pick or fixate on.
Yeah.
And because the argument against promiscuity in a very basic mechanic sense is, well, promiscuity was bad before the 50s because there was no birth control. So you had these out of wedlock children, And so the community pressure to create a family to take care of that child felt tyrannical, I'm sure, but it's what the community thought was best for the sake of the children and for taking care of the future. And you can have your own deliberations on that. Aaron, do you have something you want to jump in here with?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that the church typically would use the argument that what you were saying, like the nuclear family that is, quote unquote, the most successful is the reason why they do have this vendetta more than anything. But I guess you mentioned the worst example of what could be a homosexual relationship versus a heterosexual relationship. But I think the worst example of either relationship is what you said the first time. It's abuse. It's like that. Any relationship where you're being, gaslit, taken advantage of.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Physically abused, especially. But I also think like one of the things that I had never, even until recently, like I had never known many people personally who were in committed homosexual relationships until, my early to late 20s. And so I think, I
don't think I even know any.
I know quite a few now, but all I have to say, like,
I can't think of any.
All I have to say, I think that's going to take, the church some time to understand that, like, oh no, there are people who are not, like, there are going to be people who are in committed relationships who go to pride parades because they want to support their friends who have come out, and like, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're living a flippant lifestyle and they haven't grown up.
Yeah, definitely.
But they just want people, I can't imagine growing up in the days that I grew up and being homosexual.
Yeah,
because
same.
We used the word gay like like it was nothing more than it meant you were weak. It meant you were wimpy. It was a slur that we used for anybody who wasn't being, like the quote unquote man that they're supposed to be.
Yeah. And
I just imagine I had friends that were in the closet growing up, how they must have felt. And that's kind of why I've been thinking about this so much, is because, like, no one should be in fear of, getting beat up because of the way that their body reacts to a person that they see. I was having this discussion on Facebook recently, which, terrible place to debate, but
just invite them on my show. Like,
a lot of Christians. Yeah, right. You need to be there for Aaron. A lot of Christians believe that you are not born gay, that it's a choice.
Yeah.
And now I've recently learned that at least some people, that means not where your biological attraction is leaning, but just are you choosing to live that lifestyle out, which to me is an unfair way to look at it. Because for me to tell someone who's not living in the faith, not a Christian, not following Christ, hey, I know that, when you were 13 and you started like looking at men and thinking, oh my gosh, that makes me attracted, I'm aroused by that. You had no control over that. Yeah. But because you live like that, you're basically, a sinner. Instead of saying, well, we're all sinners, and like, how can I tell someone who's not a Christian that they shouldn't? You should choose not to do that. I know you feel that way, but choose not to be attracted to that guy. Choose not to live that lifestyle, because that's the only way you're going to have, a true relationship with God. Which is not even the gospel.
That's another interesting point, because I know tons of people in Metro, like the church that we go to even, who will concede and say like, oh, well, yeah, I think it's totally possible that people are born gay, in the sense that, they're saying, yeah, sure, they're attracted to the opposite sex or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're validating that, but then they're saying, but that means they're called to a life of celibacy. And I'm like, where are you You know, so that's
that's some Catholic Church stuff right there.
pretty weak argument. Yeah.
Well, it ends up just determining someone else's life, and that I'm
Right.
like it takes away the I forget the name of the coin, but it takes away the denarium or whatnot parable of it's like you're deciding how someone risks now, and just taking away like the agency and the free will, like depending on your Calvinist leanings.
Yeah. That'd be a fun discussion.
We could be here all night.
Yeah, I think I would start drinking to break my brain less or something like that, because it's just some because after a certain point it's like, okay, Jesus, Calvinism, it's the Matrix. Like, are we in the Matrix right now or something?
Yeah. Essentially, yeah. Right.
I don't know. I think because I wanted to get your guys' take on this, but I think I'm gonna also start seeking out like certain pastors, because I feel like the nuance and sort of progressing the church to be relevant and also to be sticking to like the core values that are in the written word, it kind of goes down to like, I'm sorry, but if you're going to have someone who just on base their actions, if we want to have like a James viewpoint of this, it's like goes out, seeks out a monogamous, like committed long-term relationship, like, you know, gets legally bound, married, however you want to call it, and has their children in whatever form, adoption or whatnot, and raises good children based on principles, values that I think I'd like to think the world could agree on from like a Ten Commandments point of view. And it's like they've raised a competent, providing human being, and I'm sorry, but like if you can have a judgment of seeking a higher ideal or a higher ideal for what you or someone else could be doing, but there's just something that feels so anti-Jesus, and at least the ethos of Jesus, where you are just condemning someone to an ulterior lifestyle, or like choosing their lifestyle because their proposed lifestyle is going to be wholesomely negative and sinful, when it's like the level of identifying how imperfect and sinful you are, or I was, and just, you know, on a piece by piece basis, that if you see a little piece of trash on the ground and you choose not to pick that up, then that is sin, and boom, that'd have been like time for the fires, kid. Like, and it's like, well, I kind of sit there and end up going like, then imperfection and sort of malevolence is naturally a part of every human, and it is striving to be better is like at least a good mantra piece to have in trying to practice life better. The faith in Christ thing, you know, as its own action and peace. So that's kind of where like trying to, at least for this topic, like arguing that, impressing that, or headbutting that into the church, it's like let's try to look at a holistic thing instead of just sticking so hard to the rules that it just ends up making us stagnant, stale, and dead.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, you know, you're saying you want to get other pastoral opinions. I think you should, you know, reach out to people. I mean, I'm sure there's Salt Lake, that's Utah, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of Mormons out here. Yeah.
We get a lot of Mormons, so see what they think, because they're not monogamous. You know, a lot of them are polygamous.
Is that still the case?
I think it's less than it used to
There's
be.
TV shows about it, so I assume it's still.
Yeah.
But
yeah, there was something that you said that I wanted to jump in on, and now I think, thankfully, listening to what you were saying and not preparing what I was going to say next, but then I forgot what I wanted to say. So,
do you remember topic lines or anything?
No, it was along the lines of what you were just talking about, but whatever it was, in the midst of,
it floated away.
Yeah, it floated away.
Did you have any jump-ins you wanted to throw in here, Hannah? No?
I don't think so. Like I said, this is definitely a topic that we're wrestling through, trying to
Has this been like your
figure
guys'
out.
Has this been your guys' main struggle? Have there been any other struggles with the church or with, you know, your relationship with, say, just Bible, God? Like, are there any other challenges that are sort of like messing with you guys, or is it mostly this one?
I wouldn't say this is my main one. I don't know about Aaron.
This is one of my main ones. I've been wrestling and actually, like, I was just having a similar conversation about this recently too, but just with the idea of abortion. Actually, I was listening to a podcast where someone quoted a verse from the Old Testament. I think it's in the. I'm not going to quote it and say it the wrong thing. I could look it up, but
run the paraphrase.
Essentially, there's a verse where. Yeah, well, I would love to give the reference, but maybe I'll look it up when Hannah's next time she talks. I'll pull it up, so just so people want to look it up. But essentially, there's a story talking about like the way a person is punished if they do harm to somebody, and it's basically saying, so let's, like, for example, Hannah's pregnant, and I am not her husband. I'm just another dude, and I push her to the ground, and the verse basically says. If a man, hits a woman who is with child, and the child comes out, but there's no harm done, then he's not punished. But if there is harm, then he's punished an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. And I've heard people who are pro-abortion or pro-choice, I guess I should say. I don't think anyone's necessarily like, yeah, go abortion, but pro-choice. Have used that verse to say that the Bible does not hold the life of the unborn child to the same standard as the mother. And they basically, there are some translations that instead of saying if there's no harm done, that say, or if the baby comes out, that say if the baby is miscarried or if the baby is aborted, essentially, but the mother is okay, then the criminal or the man who hits them just has to pay a fee, but they're not charged a life for a life, an eye for an eye, as long as the mother is not harmed. And so I've read 15 different translations to see what they say about that, and there have been two that have, like, paraphrased, used the word, like, basically, they have like a little reference in the side of the Bible or the bottom of the Bible, and it says like, or miscarriage, or
trying to modernize
the more literal
the
word
verbiage.
for word translations don't. Right, and so the more literal or word for word translations don't use that vernacular, but at the same time, there's also, as far as I know, the only verse biblically that I think the majority of pro-life people use is in the Psalms, where it talks about how God was knitting us together in our mother's womb. And that is the verse that people would use to say, okay, life begins at conception, and that is a life. And therefore that life has just as much of a right as, the mother carrying it. And scientifically, I struggle with that. I don't think the Bible says that explicitly. I also don't think that, adult women should just be going around having sex without protection and just having 10 abortions a year, which I don't think is even possible. But, like, there are people in the church who believe that that's what's happening, but it's just not black and white. And I think the church thinks it's black and white. And if a 15-year-old girl is raped by her uncle, is pregnant, I don't think that she should be forced to have that baby. And if that's a clear, like, this shouldn't be forced, then there's some spectrum where it's like, okay, if you are an adult, conscious, making your own choices, and you decide to have sex, and you carry your pregnancy until they're 8 months pregnant, and then decide, I don't want this baby. I have an issue with that, because I could take that baby out if I had the ability to do it, and that baby could survive. First trimester, I don't know. Like, it's not black and white, and the church thinks it's black and white, and the church also historically has done a very poor job of loving people who are going to have abortions. Yeah. It's condemn. You must repent. You must repent, instead of, man, this is hard. let me love you.
Yeah.
Like supporting someone through that decision and saying, I can't make this decision for you. I can tell you what I think is right. I can tell you that if you decide you want to have the baby but you don't want to keep it, then I'll help you find someone to adopt it. I will, I'll adopt it, whatever. Like, but the church has done a very poor job of following up with, hey, don't have an abortion, but we're not going to help you with when you have the baby. We don't care. Once the baby's born, it's your responsibility now. So that's something else.
Okay.
But
now that the guy has
talk
given his
about that
opinion. No, Hannah, do you have weigh in on this, especially as someone who's been a mother or is a mother?
Yeah. No, I think I agree. And I was even going to say, that idea is I think one of my biggest hang-ups right now as a Christian, is that so many hot button issues, I guess you could say, the church just looks at as very like black and white. And I don't see most things as being black and white in pretty much any area of life. But as far as abortion goes, yeah, it's really hard because I was pregnant not that long ago. Jackson is only a year and a half. So I would say there was definitely a point where, and it's hard because, like, it was a wanted pregnancy. It was to some extent a planned pregnancy. So like I can't.
It just happened really soon, but it was planned.
Yeah, I can't relate to women who are pregnant and didn't want to be pregnant, or didn't expect to be pregnant, or whatever. Yeah. Whatever these women are going through in these situations where they're seeking out an abortion. I can't relate to that. But I would say, as far as like a scientific standpoint, I think there probably is a cutoff somewhere. Where it's like, okay, at this point, yeah, I think you're killing a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, I don't know. Like, and that's where you get into the nuances of the conversation. It's like, well, and then super staunchly pro-life people will say, yes, life begins at conception. So even if the fetus or baby, depending on what vernacular you want to use, can't feel anything, you're preventing it from having a chance at life, and therefore what you've done is murder. So it's like, there's just a lot of nuance there. So, I don't know. It's, again, I don't think it's a black and white topic. And like Aaron said, I don't think that women should be forced to carry a pregnancy if for whatever reason they don't want to or are not able to.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's definitely it's definitely a hard issue, because then I also, on the other side, look at, like, we have a friend who just had a baby she's like 24 weeks pregnant, which is just over halfway through the pregnancy, and her son is now 8 months old and thriving. Like, he has some issues, but he's doing really, really well.
That's a super preemie right there.
I look at that and think, like, okay, so yeah, super, like, call it like micro preemie. So I look at that and I'm like, well, that was clearly a human being, who had a chance at survival and did survive. So I don't know. It's a nuanced topic for sure. But
yeah. Well, so let me just say, anyone who maybe wants to look at that verse themselves, it's Exodus 21 verses 22 through 25. So if you want to pull that up and look at it for yourself, like, I didn't make it up. It is in there, and good luck interpreting it.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is, there are people who use the argument, the pro-choice argument, that, well, until the baby can survive on its own, I should have the right to get rid of it. And I mean, if that argument is true, then I could leave my son right now, because he still needs me to live. If Hannah and I just stopped caring for him, he would die.
Yeah.
And he's 18 months old. So like, I don't like that argument.
No.
And that's why I struggle with when it gets that late in the pregnancy. But at the same time,
it ends up being
I'm not a woman. I don't have a baby inside me.
Yeah. Well, it ends up being a very unscientific argument point, because the reason that human children are actually born as early as they are is because of the limitation in the evolutionary process of women's hips. If women's hips got any wider, they could not realistically run to save their life from, at least if you have an evolutionary perspective, like, they couldn't do it. So you end up having this trade-off where as the skull was expanding with our higher processing from evolutionary process, yada, you end up with children needing to be born earlier in the Homo sapien race so that they could actually not kill the mother. And then there's
the only mammal
go ahead.
that has like babies that are born completely helpless.
Yeah, we are. Like elephants, horses, they're all fully able to walk and graze, and they don't need much.
Yeah, giraffes come out with these long legs and they're just going.
Yeah, ready to go.
Cool.
Ready to go. It's super cute and silly. But yeah, that's where that argument is very shallow, coming from the pro-choice element. The only like real commentary, at least I received, was from a mother figure because she's had 2 daughters and is quite read in her politics more or less, but like she said, I've never had to make that option. I've never been compromised in that situation, but I would at least like to have the option and the extrapolation, I guess, the real medical option. Because I think I would personally want a cultural shift where we look at abortion as like a taking of life, because I was doing a very amateur argumentation in my head. Is like, well, can we all agree that like going out and killing a lizard is a bad thing? Like in a very small, like you can sit there with like the animal rights people. It's like you're still killing like a insignificant, but you're taking life of a sort.
Right.
And I think that most of the rational populace would be like, taking life of any kind is a bad thing. Worm, embryo, lizard, like bad, like generally bad. And it's like, so can we have a more distinguished and nuanced conversation about like, you have to do with your consequences of just what happens in life, whether from mistakes, or just bad happenstance. Like, and I'm putting the rape things like out the door. Like that's like, hey, you have a decision to make, and yes, like especially with the framing of the church, we should be supporting you to figure out what is the story that you want to have based on the horrible things that have happened to you.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have our support, like either like, because there's a certain part of me that's like, the church should be like that parent. It's like, you're here, you're with us, you're a part of us. Make your choices and we are here. Like, make your choices and we are here. We are going to tell you what the highest ideal is. And the right people are going to be challenging you for that. But everyone, including those that are challenging you, no one's getting rid of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just read, no joke, like while I was waiting to jump on this pod with you, a quote that someone did from a famous pastor, R.C. Sproul. And apparently he said, if there's anything that God is angry about, it's abortion. And I'm thinking, I wonder when R.C. Sproul said that, I wonder if he knows how big of an epidemic child sex trafficking is. Because if I had to guess, I think God's probably more angry about that.
I mean, he's angry enough to get Ashton Kutcher to stop acting and go take care of that with the FBI. Like,
for real, Ashton Kutcher. What a. I mean, honestly, like, it's sad. It's not even being hyperbolic. Like, the fact that he has significantly stopped acting to try and fight human trafficking is awesome. What a great thing! Like,
fucking the most gangster
someone who actually
story
has a
recently.
platform. He has a platform, and he has a platform and has tons of money. Like, I talk to almost everyone I know about human trafficking. Like, people are annoyed with me about it, and that's all I can do because I don't have a multi-million dollars and I don't have, a huge platform. But like, I do what I can with what I have, and if I ever have a lot of money, I can assure you a lot of it will be going towards, fighting that, and not just for children, for all people. No one should be being trafficked. No one should be in slavery.
Yeah.
But the church makes a big deal about that too. But
well, I want to bring it back to the
go ahead.
The viewpoint of how the church relates to all this. I was going to say, again, my frustration as a Christian comes a lot from what the church makes a big deal out of and what it chooses to not make a big deal out of. And that's the big deal for me, especially with abortion, is the church, and not even all churches, but a lot of churches make a big deal out of abortion, like don't have abortions. And that's just wrong. But again, they're not concerned about, real, not that abortion isn't a real life issue, but they're not so concerned about the kids who are already alive, say, sitting in the foster care system, or, any other kind of.
There are other battles that they could be going at and winning very clearly, and it's not clear that they're even giving two shits about them.
Well, and not only that, but like I would like to meet a human woman who has not had an abortion because someone was standing in front of an abortion clinic with a sign that said abortion is sin, you're going to hell. I don't think one person has decided.
I think
I could be wrong.
I think
there's but not many.
He's reminding me of like the classic evangelical part of being a Christian. Like, you have to be landing like a very perfect situation to get a random actually, let me frame this better. It is rare that you're yelling at someone or like aggressively discussing with someone why they should like take Jesus as their savior or do these things. Like, it's the classic like, preaching at them. Like, that doesn't work for anything. It doesn't work for anything political, cultural, religious. It always ends up like the best thing. It usually ends up coming down to literally having something like this. Like, let's actually like, hi, this is my name. These are my flaws. What's your name? You're welcome to share your flaws with me, because I also have problems. Drinks excessively, and that's I don't know. That's sort of where I end up with like Aaron. It makes a very good like satirical point. It's like, I have yet to meet a young woman who has an unwanted pregnancy who sees this sign outside of an abortion clinic and goes, I'm gonna keep this baby for 20 years. Like, it just it doesn't sit in a human logic, if you will.
Yeah,
for sure. And I think, I guess it's important to point out that this is not true of every Christian, not true of every church. I have a good friend who went to a church in North Carolina, in the Charlotte area, and a Nigerian child choir came to their church to like perform. They were doing a tour of America. They came there to sing, and there was like 12 of them that were singing, and they had, between the 12 of them, 5 siblings total. So there were 17 in total of these Nigerian orphans. And my friend's church just decided that between the church congregation, they were going to adopt all of them. So every one of those children was adopted, and have families in Charlotte, North Carolina now. And like, there are people that are doing the right thing and that are trying to care for people, and that do want to see women in those situations given every option, not just, hey, your options are be a 14-year-old mom or have an abortion. Like, no, like, we would love to. There are so many people that can't have kids and would love to adopt any kid that would come their way. And so, like, I just want to, like, I'm not anti-Christian. Obviously, I'm a Christ follower. So, like, I want people to know too, like, yeah, there are Christians who are doing the right thing, and or the right thing as far as we see it. But like, at the end of the day, we're all pretty fallible human beings, and we're all making mistakes. And like, even the best Christian, quote unquote, best Christian, is, like the Bible would say, that their righteousness is filthy rags compared to the righteousness of God. God is so far above us that like we don't live up, we don't measure up to Jesus. We have unity with God because of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so like,
I
not
think
about
that's
all
where
of a sudden, I'm the best man ever.
Yeah. No, it's class. I wish I could actually quote Steve Brown stuff better, because I still get his discs and stuff with Key Life. I'm just keeping a catalog because that's been one of the few pastors that I've like listened to and been like, yeah, this guy is going to be a mentor that I've actually had brunch with him twice.
Really?
I love that guy to death just because he feels like he sits on Earth, and he'll admit that he sits on Earth, and he's quite fucked up, without saying it. He's fucked up. So I've always appreciated him. I'll fly back to Florida when he sadly passes, which God knows when that'll be. He's like Morgan Freeman with how he's always been old, but he doesn't look like he's ever gonna die. But you reminded me of so. It's a lot of things, so let me see if I can organize this. Because the first thing that you made me think of was mega churches and this perhaps just milquetoast form of Christianity, which may have this feel-good element, but there's something about where it's like there's a lot of critiques, but I sort of end up going like the purest form, and I'm paraphrasing Steve Brown on this, is like if you actually wanted to have a proper true like pastor or church or Christian that was telling the truth and like really being honest with like his congregation, you'd have to put up tents. Because if you wanted a pastor or a leadership figure that is going to tell the truth so much so, you're going to end up with a very small congregation on account of most people are not looking for that much truth, and they're looking for less fallible characters than them as their heroes or leadership figures. And this is where I'm trying to frame out the part where it's like it just feels like there's a very inaction element, and I would want to attribute that more to mega churches, and I'm probably unfairly like framing them on this one, at least some, where it's like all this money, all this finance, all this buildup, and I want to be kind of challenging, and this is like a direct challenge to anyone that wants to sort of have their own answer for it, because I want to make sure it's an honest one. It's like, what are you really doing, like in your communities or and trying to deal with like all the problems that are there? Because I don't know, the media doesn't frame out everything honestly these days and stuff, but there just doesn't. It just feels very stagnant. Like the church just feels very stagnant and has been stuck since I was going. And the progression has just been like, hey, like, LGBTQ are allowed to get married. And that's been like the great landmark of our time, you could say, for civil rights. But it just feels like the church is not trying to is not having an active part in articulating values and pushing for values and really challenging upcoming generations and current generations to, I don't know, be better than they are, take on responsibility and stuff. Like, I'm gonna do the name drop now finally, but like, there's a podcast that Jordan Peterson had with one of the Catholic cardinals, who's in Rome or whatnot, and the cardinal told him, it's like, no, you've done more actually for the Catholic Christian faith with just like what you've done for responsibility and challenging men, challenging the generation, which has appealed a lot to young men, but also your integration of science, evolution, and religion with his the psychological significance of the Bible, and he's only done Genesis so far. Like, I think I'm gonna lose my point real quick, but yeah, that's where I end up I want more out of the church. It's classic that the person outside of the discipline is the one that revolutionizes it, and so it's like I want this revolutionary perspective to start catching tinder over in the main body, because there needs to be, I think, some sort of revolution from this sect of the Western population if we're going to really save anything and really like do any good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I do, like 40 hours a week, because my jobs are very brain dead and I don't have to talk to people.
No, I'm like trying to unpack. It is, yeah, it's interesting because especially with mega churches, and I don't know, because like I've said, I've been at the same church my whole life. I've not even like I've been to other churches, but not like really explored too many others. But from the outside, it definitely seems like church has become for Christians, and for Christians to like be comfy and come and feel something on a Sunday morning in pretty buildings. And
Sometimes pretty buildings.
sometimes pretty buildings. Yeah, sometimes they're not even pretty. And much less about their communities and reaching people who need to be reached and loving people who are otherwise considered unlovable, or, you know, I don't even know. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, it's funny because when you were talking about mega churches and some of the things you said made me think about. We were just having this conversation just recently with we had some friends over the other night, and we were talking about how the current model of church is really more it's more about passion than it is about like substance. So for the younger generation, I mean, Hannah and I are 9 years apart. I mean, some people would say we're the same generation. Some people would say we're separate generations. I don't really know how that works. But I would say that for these people in their early to mid 20s, the Christian experience that they're looking for is, I want to go to a service where I can hear some upbeat music and follow that upbeat music with some more slow and patient music that's going to kind of mellow me out and get me ready for the sermon. And then I want to hear a short sermon, 20 to 30 minutes. It's not going to challenge me very much. Like you said, it's going to just be like, it's going to make me feel good. It's going to puff me up. Then we'll sing a few more songs. And then maybe we'll have, a prayer call. Come down to the altar if you want prayer for X, Y, or Z. Or some pastor will say, there's someone in here who's struggling with, anger, and think it's prophetic. Like, no, dude, like you're in a church full of 1,000 people. And more than half of them are struggling with anger. But more than half of people hear that and like, oh, it's me. He's talking to me. And yeah, it's very seeker friendly.
Playing psychic kind of games off of iDrive.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I actually, that I like about our church, and we are not a perfect church. Our church is not perfect by any means, but we try to do things in our community. So like we've organized community service days where like we get other churches together and we just go out and we help people in the community that can't do things around their house. So like we'll go to the houses of elderly folks and clean their yards, whatever. And then some of us are cleaning, and some of us just sitting and talking with them. So I talked with this gentleman who was, retired from the Army. He was in his, 80s. He just had blood drawn, had just hurt himself and fallen. Like he was beaten up, but no one talks to him. It's just him and his wife. They're both old. They can't do much. And like just having me as a young early 30s guy, and then my friend Glenn, who's a early 50s guy, talk to him for 20 minutes. Like you could just see it. His life was made better because of those 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, no, my grandmother.
And how many people like him?
Yeah, my grandmother lights up when I call her. Like it's.
And you're her grandson.
Yeah.
And so how many people on that day were living in that same area who had no one come talk to them? And the thing is, it shouldn't just be Christians. It doesn't have to just be Christians. It's a human thing. Like we should just care for people.
Yeah.
But
I agree with that. But
not.
based on some stats that I've heard about, it's kind of, what is it? The most charitable organizations in the world are Christian ones.
Yeah.
So I end up kind of looking at the church and being like, you are the guys to spearhead this. Like you have historically been, but like there are some universal truths that we'd all like to think we'd agree on and should be like self-evident. We don't need like religion to follow, but it's like, I don't know, man. It's hard to see a lot of mercy coming out of certain groups of people these days.
I think I wonder too if the church in general hasn't kind of shot itself in the foot by portraying itself, especially in, I would say, the last 10 years or so, as just super legalistic. And when you come to the abortion issue and you come to purity culture or, you know, anti-homosexuality, and the church, when you hear, especially people who aren't Christians talking about the church, it's not a positive thing anymore. It's like a very negative, you know, Christianity is like, I went to Rollins College in Winter Park, which is a very liberal school, and people don't like Christianity there. You know, it's like a very, you know, I had most of my professors would like openly mock Christianity. So it's like the church has really kind of shot itself in the foot because they've turned themselves into this like entity that no one wants to hear anything from.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, who's gonna expect the church to be doing good things now, because no one sees it that way anymore.
They've been the combative part of the community for so long. They've been the combative, ignorant part of the community for so long.
Right.
Well, that's where. So, did Jackson wake up, or is
Yeah. Aaron's going to.
right.
It's so funny because usually he'll wake up and like one of us will go in there and be like, "You're good," and he'll be like, and I'll kind of like fall back asleep.
Yeah.
Just takes like
He's just
a
like
hand on the back.
yeah, he's just doing a safety check. Like, we're good, no lions, okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, I would encourage you to, in your spare time, I can send you the link for that podcast. But I think one of the things that the Cardinal was pointing out in the podcast he had with Peterson was how the church and the Catholic Church tried to get more and more mainstream, and how it was to try to attract people and keep numbers up or something like that, which is where it's become less and less substance, as Aaron would say. And the irony is that, like, the call to responsibility that came out of Peterson's world has sort of done the revival, and it's kind of instilling people like with meaning, as opposed to like just, here's this feel good thing I do on Sundays for pick a reason, as opposed to here's a highly disciplined religion that is on earth with how it interacts with it and doesn't take itself too seriously, and is, you know, demanding me to be the best I can be along these lines that are, you know, some would say reasonable lines of law and order, or whatever you could say. It like just making the argumentation that's like, hey, this is getting too bland, mainstream, and without substance. That's why no one takes it seriously and no one cares. And now we just sail off to the horizon aimlessly.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think that would be interesting for people to listen to with that episode of the Peterson podcast. But yeah. Do you have anything else we could probably dive into?
I mean, we could talk about religion and politics, talk about religion and race.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things. What about, do you have any burning questions as someone who, you know, is more, I would guess, more on the outside looking in than we are?
Well, you mentioned the religion and race thing, and I'm just like, well, that sounds like a hot button that I wasn't even really too aware of. Like, I know there's a lot of racism accusation running around these days at those that are and are not deserving of it. So, like, is there something that you guys have like seen or identified to where like has the church gotten more racist, or is it just like I wouldn't expect that at all. I would not think that was an issue. I haven't heard anything about that. I'm pretty sure like the news would have jumped on that.
More racist? Or has the church just not gotten less racist ever?
Oh,
Is
okay.
the real question.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can go all the way back to, the Puritans and the origin of our country. And so, like, first of all, there's this huge false idea that America is a Christian nation. Like, it's certainly not. The founding fathers, the majority of them were not Christians. Many of them were deists and believed that there was one God, but they didn't necessarily believe it was a Christian God. Um, and but on top of that, you also have Puritan pastors who, whether I mean, maybe had slaves themselves, but whether they did or didn't, they use these verses in the New Testament that talk about bondservants and talk about, you know, some translations say the word slaves, but a biblical bondservant was someone who owed you a debt and they worked for you to pay off their debt. And
Yeah.
once their debt was paid, they were free.
Yeah.
And the call of the master, quote unquote, was to care for and love his servants. And the care for the servants was to care for and love their masters. And that
Yeah.
is nothing like what slavery was in this country
Mhm.
when it happened. And so there's that fallacy, and there are a number of white American Christians who don't understand that the repercussions of slavery are still being felt. You
Mhm.
know, it's you drop a ball in a pool of water, and the waves. That was Jackson's toy on the porch, just lighting up.
We have
We have a
ghosts
ghost
in our house.
I don't believe in ghosts, but having said that, there are some things that happen in our house that are odd. But yeah, there are shockwaves still being felt from whether systemic racism is still whether there are still laws put in place that
Mhm.
hold back any particular race. I don't know,
Yeah.
but there certainly were in the 80s.
Yeah,
and
redlining or
to
whatnot.
that, and we're still redlining is obviously one of the bigger ones, but like we're still living in the aftermath of that, and there are people who don't think that people of color are still set back because of that, because well, they have more scholarships than we do as white people, and they have more opportunity now. That every company is forced to hire a certain number of people of this race or this gender, and instead of
Which, if anything, should tell you that racism is still alive and kicking. I wouldn't, and maybe it's unfair to say that the church is racist, but
there
are a lot of Christians, people in the church, who I would say are so blind to racism that it's racist.
You feel they're negligent
I don't know
towards
if that.
Yeah, like they're negligent to the idea that such prejudices could still be alive and well.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like I could speak anecdotally, but I know where my dad lives, like 2.5 hours north of Orlando, in the middle of fucking nowhere. You meet him. You meet the ignorant, rednecky white people that just like have they just are racist. Like there's no conversation. I know we were at a friend's like birthday get together at a bar in Orlando, and we met just this random guy just playing pool, and he's like, "Yep, here's an opinion," and I was like, "Wow, that's disappointing. I liked you." Like, and I was like, "Wow," and you're like, and he was like my age, just standard like Central Florida redneck, and it's like, well, there it is. Like but I've met guys I've met people that run the Confederate flag, and they're like, there's a lot better reasons to hate people than their skin. I'm just like, well, that's a reasonable take outside of, I guess the flag you're flying, but
I would say that the ignorance is still pretty abounding. Even, I don't know, like our parents' generation, I guess, and maybe a little, but even sometimes our personal parents will be having conversations and we're like, did you even hear what you just said? Like that was like really hella racist. Like, but you can't it's hard because it's, they just don't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
I mean, after 9/11, my dad became very, very
Scared of hummus.
Middle Eastern racist, and yeah,
Yeah.
sadly, but thankfully he has kind
Mellowed
of
out.
seen the error in his ways in that, and I think he still has a. Sorry.
He mellowed
was
out a
that?
bit. He mellowed out a bit about it.
Yeah, I think he's realized that it's not everyone is like that, and like not every Middle Eastern person is a Muslim extremist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are a very small population of the Middle East.
I would say to give a good example, a lot of people in our parents' generation in the church are like to have people who got real mad about the whole Colin Kaepernick situation.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give you like a threshold of where people are at in their racial ignorance.
Mm.
Well, yeah, and actually, my dad actually brought that up less than a year ago. Hey, Aaron, do you think that he, we were talking about him kneeling, and I just said, did that offend you? My dad served in the military, and he said, yeah, it did. And I'm like, well, I don't think it should have. I don't think he was. He spoke to people who were retired veterans and asked them, what is what's a respectful way for me to protest? And they said, take a knee. Okay, so that's what he did, and that was the advice of other veterans. So
yeah,
everyone's gonna have an opinion on that.
I remember hearing that like on a video or whatnot, and there's in a video coverage where like, yeah, you talk to like I think a Marine veteran or something like that, and I was like, well, that's like it's acceptable in my terms, and just I don't know, people want to get in an uproar about it. It's like they kind of forget that students had the Supreme Court ruled that students had the right to burn the flag as a form of free speech and protest. And it's like, okay, like at least for me, I don't have a problem with what Colin was trying to put out at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Well, there's another that's an issue that's also tied in is the whole like people are calling it Christian nationalism, where the church has become so tied into some kind of skewed form of patriotism, where the church and America have like become kind of like grossly enmeshed in their minds, and so the flag is like a religious symbol almost.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly anti-Christian.
It's
the idea of and biblically, like we are literally in the Bible told that our citizenship is in heaven. We are not citizens of earth. Like, so if we're supposed to be ambassadors to earth. So if we're living in America, yes, well, like I'm an American in the sense that that's where I was born. But like, if I'm a Christ follower, my first allegiance is to Christ, and so
your identity is higher than the nation and the flag.
Because yeah, absolutely, and like I love that I'm American. I think it's cool. Like I hope that the USA soccer team actually qualifies for the World Cup and does well. But like, I don't care.
That's the most depressing thing you've said all night.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I don't care if someone doesn't, think that it's great to be an American. Like, who cares? You're here. If you don't like it, you don't have to stay. But if you want to stay, stay. Like,
yeah, but that has gotten like tied into Christianity. So I don't know how. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Because founding fathers were all Christians and they all read their Bibles 10 times a day, and it's just not even reality. So
I know what Aaron was talking about with them being deists. So they, as I would frame it or as I understand it, is that deists, yes, but there was a lot of praise, especially out of Jefferson and Franklin, and I think Washington. Like there was praise for like the Christian value set that came from the Bible, but they had like this. It's reminding me of like here's this history exam from like earlier in the 1900s, and it would be infinitely harder than any of the multiple choice bullshit that we went through. And it's like you have to like sort of like realize that the level of education and self-education that probably even went into the founding fathers is much higher than even our average IQ intake, even with the gradual rise in IQ of the human population over the past 100 years or whatnot. So I just end up thinking that there are super simple narratives that are ran, and then like the fear elements of these Christian populists just end up overbinding themselves to the national side of at least their identity, of their country, of where they live, and what they are trying to hope to preserve, So that's the framing that I would think to rationalize the irrational behavior, if you will.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's very divisive times we live in.
Yeah, I actually want to read a friend of mine who she moved to Alaska, literally just texted me, and I want to read part of what she said because it weirdly applies to what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And really is like, at least for me, and I would say probably for Aaron too, what I'm about to read is really the reason why we even, I'll say because nothing I'm going to talk to you about, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this is really the reason why I even call myself a Christian at this point, because the reality is I'm really pretty disgusted with what Christianity has turned into in our, Western culture. But there are some people who, feel similarly to me and have just totally stopped, even aligning with that name or calling themselves Christians, and I haven't. And I think it's really because of this. And what she said was, the church and the people in the church are just people. We aren't perfect, and we aren't Jesus. The collective group of people, the church's actions, are a reflection of people, not of Jesus and his love for you, which I think really at this point is the only reason why I even am still attending a church and call myself a Christian, because, at the end of the day, to me at least, it's about my relationship with Jesus and not, the church, because the church is it's an organization. It's not, I don't know what it is anymore, but it's not the foundation of my belief,
Yeah.
Which I think, at least for me, is important to remember.
Well, we sort of end up with applying the Tower of Babel to any human organization, even a church. Gets too big.
Yeah.
Gets too corrupted in whatever form you want to call it, and it's gonna get knocked the fuck down. So big that it must fail.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I really respect and appreciate that about, and I would actually I'll put the words in your mouth, Aaron, but I take it that you guys are of similar opinions for that, of just like actually let's actually have you put out your own words there. Like, Aaron, what keeps you going with the church?
I mean, well, so I think what keeps me going with the church is I know the value of Christian community in my personal life.
Yeah, that's another big one for sure.
And so I can look back at my life before I was, a Christ follower, before I was walking with the Lord, whatever you want to call it. And I can look back at the years of my life where I was the most loving, the best version of myself that I think I've been, were seasons, to use a word that Christians use a lot, seasons of life where I was spending a lot of time studying the Bible and just talking about my own struggles with other Christians. And so and I also think, something that is clear in the Bible, that I don't think there really is a translational issue with it, is the idea that meeting together is good and is beneficial. Mm-hmm. And so if if I know how much of a piece of crap I am apart from Jesus, then it should be easy for me to be gracious and merciful to someone else who is a piece of crap apart from Jesus. And that applies to Christians and non-Christians. And so yeah, so there's people in my church that suck, and I try not to interact with them if I don't have to, and I try to love them when I do have to. And I probably should be more willing to reach out to them and like interact with them, because maybe I could do some good. But there's also people at my church that really love the Lord and really love people and really want to, kind of what you said, like want to see, we have to start our churches in Castleberry. We live in Winter Springs. Like people at my church that really want to see those places better. Castleberry has one of the highest ratios of drug use like in the country. It's crazy, based on the statistics that they have. Like there's just a lot of people who just are addicted to drugs, and like we should be caring for those people. And there's people at my church that want to do that. And so yeah, so like that's what keeps me going is not. I've been a member of 3 different churches in my life, if you don't count my Catholic church that I have really no memories of besides Lasagna. And each one of them has had many imperfections, and whether it was lack of discipline from the church leadership, or lack of any semblance of like morality. Like the church I was at before Metro was a very Reformed or Calvinist, to use that word again, church. And one of the big flaws of a church like that is this mindset of like, well, we're sinners. We're just going to sin anyway, so who cares? And so like you'll find in churches some like
lazy Calvinist
that's
stuff.
A very like yeah well, but that's the idea, is like, well, God's gonna save who he's gonna save, so I don't have to go out and do any evangelizing. But also like I don't know how familiar you are with Calvinism. Like, do you know what TULIP is? The acronym TULIP?
No.
Well, it's way too much to get into, but the first letter T stands for total depravity, and it's just the idea that apart from God, we are just going to hell. And that's a human nature, is that we're naturally going to be drawn into ourselves and do selfish things. And most Calvinists are like, well, that's who we are. So like you will see, I think one example is just like most Calvinists are very licentious with the way they drink, and you will see a lot of drunk Calvinists in church settings. Like, hey, let's go out and have 15 beers in a night. Like, okay, that's probably not the best decision to make, as
This feels like such a departure,
but it happens.
Or like, anyone.
Well, sorry, this feels like such a departure from the framing of what a Calvinist was, as Steve Brown talked about it in his sermons from years ago. Like, this is hilarious.
Well, this is why. It's
like a Baptist without any song.
Ago. Yeah. Well, and this is what it is. It's in church leadership, we learn this. And so like as a youth leader, I learned this. Basically it's this: my students, or in the case of a pastor, my congregation is going to take the things that I do well in excess, and they're going to do them well in a limited fashion. And then they take the things that I do poorly in a limited fashion and do it poorly in excess. And so if a pastor is like, goes out for a beer with his congregation, well, the congregation is like, oh shoot, we can drink, pastor's drinking. And then they're going to have a house party, and they're all going to be just getting hammered. It's probably more so the case with students. And so that's why, like, in student ministry, we took a trip to Universal Studios one time, and my brother was with us, and he's 21, and like he wanted to order a beer. My youth pastor was like, "Hey Zach, no, you can't order a beer. Like there are teenagers with us," and it's like inherently that's not wrong, but it's just the idea that as soon as they see an adult drinking, like, oh, we can drink, and then they're gonna go off
Yeah.
and so
It's
I think that's why when
it's a natural
when
trickle
you
down
have
of
a congregation
of
like
leadership,
that,
basically. It's
you'll
it's the trickle down
yeah,
effect of leadership, basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, we're hitting 8:42 my time, so we got about like 15 left till y'all might want to be heading for bed. Y'all want to keep going, or where are you feeling at right now?
I mean, I will put it this way: if I don't have anything that I'm burning to share except for maybe some political stuff, but I'm not burning to share it. But but if you have questions or thoughts, like we're happy to answer any more questions, or if you have any like final, wrap up that you want to do that, button it up nicely or as nicely as we can.
I love how you're putting like
We've kind of been all over the place, which I think is great. Like,
yeah, you've been put. I love how you're putting like a production quality like requirement on me there. It's like, hey, thanks for joining us on our podcast. Make sure you send this off with a good buttoned up closeout there.
well, I was gonna say I'm a writer, but that's not true. I have a degree in creative writing, but I'm certainly not a writer.
Oh, I love that. I
Maybe
love that.
someday.
I have
But
my friend has this. He's got a series basically for this character Thorgan, and I'm basically the head writer for it because he's like big picture, but I love writing script. I love dialogue.
yeah,
Like
okay.
Newsroom is one of my favorite shows of all time because I just
Yeah,
loved how Aaron Sorkin wrote that. Um, so yeah, I love you have the degree and I have very very little practice. Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, no, I think we can.
Dialogue is so tough too.
I love it. I love it. If you want to if you want to catch up later, just to like read through what I've
Yeah, yeah.
made,
We definitely
I think that'd be a good fun. And I think we'll dive into politics at another time because I don't think we can get all of our political discourse in 15 minutes.
should. Yeah,
So, but I want to thank you both for being so gracious coming on and being public and honest about like where you guys are at with your churches, the church, and like where everything's kind of feels it's been and where it's come at this time. Because I don't know. I feel there needs to be some sort of revolution from one of the best entities that it can be. Because I don't see anything else currently being able to counter some of the negative shit that I see in the world in the world and in the West these days. So,
yeah.
but Hannah, Aaron, thank you for coming
Yes,
on.
man.
Good luck with Jackson.
Ah,
And we may have you two on or just one at a time in the future. But thank you very much, and we'll catch you around.
Thanks.